National championship game on deck. We're going to be there live and on location in Los Angeles, California. So is Georgia, and so is, check the fine print, TCU. Now, what I like to do sometimes is pretend somewhere out there, one of our viewers or listeners, for whatever medical reason, just had to get cryogenically frozen in August. And I picture them just thawing out right now, and they're looking at Max Duggan, and they're looking at TCU. The first thing they're saying is, oh, good, Duggan won the quarterback job. The second thing they're probably saying is, Gator Bowl, Cheez-It Bowl, Alamo Bowl, no, national championship game. And then their jaw hits the ground, and they say, tell me how it happened. Well, we know how it happened. Can they finish the drill? How realistic is this? Well, producer Jesse, early paper pop, producer Jesse walks up to me today and says, do you know that this is the biggest point spread in college football playoff championship game history? Nay. Yeah, he talks like a horse. Nay, this is the biggest point spread this millennium in a championship game. If you're watching on YouTube, you see them. If you're not, let me tell you, the closest we've come to a 12.5 point spread in a championship game was 0-2 Miami, favored by 11.5 against Ohio State. Anyone remember how that turned out, by the way? That's interesting. Florida State trailed like 21-3 or something like that against Auburn in 2013. They came back to win, but they were favored by 11. 2000 Florida State favored by 10.5. 2012 Alabama, the massacre against Notre Dame. They were only a 10-point favorite. They went on to roll. So that's the bad news if you're TCU. I do have a little ray of sunshine to send your way there in Fort Worth, not to be confused with Dallas, Fort Worth. TCU is the third team to make the title game in the college football playoff era without winning their conference. Two other teams did it. 2017 Bama won the title. 2021 Georgia won the title. That's the best I could do before we dive into the preview, okay? So that's not the worst news in the world. How is this different from the Michigan game? If you've been around here a long time, you know what I'm about to do. If you haven't been around all that long, welcome aboard. Thank you. Please subscribe to the channel. But also, we don't think there's a lot of skill or particularly a lot of fun in looking at a 12.5 point favorite and saying, I think that team's going to win. Well, of course you do. Everyone does. If you don't think that, you will be paid off handsomely, Mattress Mac, for example, for betting the other side of this game. No, when we have a point spread in the double digits, what we like to do is ask ourselves, do we think the upset could happen? Sure, the upset could happen. Smaller percentage chance, but we think it could happen. Then the next thing we like to do is we like to say, if it were to happen, we're going to spend our preview talking about how it would happen. And so I go back to the Michigan game because TCU was an underdog or frog in that one too, and they won. How did it happen? Well, there were a few different things, obviously. A lot of non-offensive points, a lot of crazy stuff happened. But if that game, or the outcome rather, were to be duplicated here, how much similarity is there? I don't think a whole lot. I heard someone a couple of days ago say, Georgia is just a little bit more talented version of Michigan. That's a pretty lazy way to describe it, quite frankly. And we have unlimited amounts of time on this show, so we don't have to be lazy. Sometimes we are, but we don't always have to be. Georgia's got a way better run defense than Michigan. Now, that's a standard statistic. We could always tell you what someone ranks nationally. Spoiler alert, Georgia's number one. They give up 77 points per game, or 77 yards per game on the ground, so that's really good. Now, in the interest of presenting the upset alert potential here, I certainly think it is something that bears noting that the way TCU plays offense requires you to play with a light box defensively. A lot more so than if you played a standard I formation team, which doesn't exist anymore, but you get the picture there. Here's the issue I think TCU runs into here. Georgia does that all the time anyway. Totally comfortable playing light boxes. The reason they're comfortable with it is because their personnel is good enough and they're deep enough. So crazier things have happened, but I don't necessarily think that you will see success from TCU just because they get Georgia into different defensive looks pre-snap than Georgia's used to being in. Georgia's fine playing that way. So then the next thing that I think about is I go back to thinking just last week about what we saw and how could that be utilized for TCU's benefit. Well, we certainly saw Ohio State throw the ball a whole lot on Georgia, right? And we have seen guys like Quentin Johnson really victimize opposing secondaries with Max Duggan delivering the ball, and Max Duggan's had time to throw, and Georgia doesn't have the greatest pass rush in the world. They certainly don't have individual, dynamic, future first-round talents on the edge. It gives you some hope, right? Sure, it should give you hope. I think they'll have a, word of the week here, modicum of success throwing the ball on Georgia. I think the issue is Georgia has become something offensively. I got to credit our buddies, college football nerds. I made the mistake of listening to their preview earlier today. I say mistake because otherwise I could just make the points they made and not have to reference them, but now I got to reference them. But they made a really good point, and it's right there in front of your face. They've got a lot of guys back. Like, it would be a big mistake on your part and my part to look at Georgia and just base our opinion solely off numbers, because the fact is a lot of the Georgia offensive stat profile from October is irrelevant now. They didn't have A.D. Mitchell back. You saw what Arian Smith did last week, and not just on that long touchdown pass where he broke a kid's ankle, rest in peace, heal quickly, but also just the presence on the field of that kind of speed. There's not a faster player on the field, either side of the ball, than Arian Smith. You hadn't seen him all year. He's just kind of been there. You know, Georgia fans have wondered, when's Arian Smith going to work his way into the rotation? There he is. How sweet it must be, as James Taylor would say, to be able to wait till this deep in the year to just insert Arian Smith, who can't run as fast as sound travels, but he can see it in the distance. And so he's there, A.D. Mitchell's there, and then you combine that with like Brock Bowers and whatnot. And what I'm leading to with this, there's a school of thought out there that Georgia's best bet into this game, or, well, since I'm probably going to clip this later, I want to restate that. There's a school of thought out there that I don't necessarily prescribe to, that Georgia's best bet to winning this game is to take a conservative approach, take the air out of the ball, keep TCU's offense off the field. Basically, don't put the ball in the air because 2 out of the 3 things that could happen are bad, which people used to say a lot in like 1973. I don't think that's the approach they need to take at all. Georgia's best bet to not only winning this game, but getting margin in this game, I'm talking about stretching it beyond the point of reachability for TCU, is to let their horses get turned loose, and it benefits them. Stylistically, this game benefits Georgia the more they throw the ball, and I'm going to tell you why. Sports Info Solutions, I think, had the stat of this matchup. Now, I don't even know if they're aware, but I'm aware because this jumps off the paper, which I'm going to pop before reading this. You think about all these guys who are healthy now. A.D. Mitchell, Arian Smith, just there, Brock Bowers, and you think about how good Stetson Bennett's played in these moments. He's played his best football. Georgia, when they're on offense, they are 7th in the country in pressure rate allowed. They give their quarterback time to throw. TCU defensively is 100th in pressure generated. They could rip TCU secondary to pieces in a very non-Georgia-like fashion. It wouldn't surprise me at all if you turned on this game, if Todd Monken, approved by Kirby Smart, so chooses to put the foot on the pedal a little bit offensively through the air. It wouldn't surprise me at all to have them put up numbers through the air that you hadn't seen them put up all year. Last week, they had to do it. This week, they could choose to do that. So there's a lot of edge to Georgia. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure that out. But we were talking about paths to upsets here. What's the path to the upset? Well, if we were to accept this point spread as a default, if we just assume, all right, Georgia's about 12.5 points or 13 points better than TCU, let's start from there. Then let's work backwards. If the final score is 33-20, let's work backwards and see how we could change that final score. Well, the first thing would normally be red zone. I didn't have Jesse and company make the graphics, but you don't even want to see how big an edge Georgia has, both ways in terms of red zone. Could you have an anomaly of a game? I guess you could. There's no reason for me to expect that, though. That's why it would be an anomaly. It would be unexpected. The second thing is, like Ohio State last week, yeah, you're an underdog, but maybe you just have a really, really solid talent roster, and maybe they come through and you can't hold that much talent back. That's not in play here either. Georgia, 15 5-star players on their roster. TCU has 1. Georgia, 53 4-star players on the roster. TCU has 16. So basically, there's a huge talent edge here. There is a big statistical red zone edge, both in favor of Georgia. Turnovers, that's the name of the game. It was last week for TCU. This is the great unknown. This is where things have to happen. Now, I wouldn't call it a great conundrum, but here's why you get paid a lot of money to be a major head coach in college football. Kirby Smart knows this. He knows it long before anyone like me says it. He knows that our best statistical shot, I probably put our team in the best position to win based on the numbers I'm looking at by throwing the ball a lot on them. However, I've also watched the Michigan film from last week, and I know that Michigan tried to do some things too that ended up probably costing them the game when they really didn't have to. So, what kind of approach am I going to take? It's a great unknown. I don't know that. I do not know how they'll approach this game. I got a way I think they will. I think they'll be ultra aggressive through the air. I don't think they'll tiptoe. I do not think Georgia's going to dip their toe into the water of this game at all. I think it would be a mistake to do so. You just let someone hang around who you may rightfully think has no business hanging around with you. The other thing that they were able to do last week against Michigan, TCU, is stealing possessions. So if you could come to me with a formula that tells me they're going to steal a possession each half and they're going to be plus 2 turnovers and 10 to 14 non-offensive points are in the cards for them, that's all well and good. Not only do I not have the skill to predict that, I've also got to acknowledge that with the edge Georgia has defensively, you're just as, if not more likely, to turn the ball over to them. They're just as, if not more likely, to force you into negative situations, and they're just as, if not more likely, to score on you defensively or just non-offensively. Yeah, it's not a very rosy picture, but we don't play it on paper. We do play it on the field for a reason. Let's take a look at what the model thinks. The Vegas number right now at Caesars, at least, is Georgia minus 12.5. There have been some 13s out there, some 13.5s out there. I don't know which way I expect that to break. I think there's still some Georgia money that probably comes back in, but I'm sure just based on sheer principle, there are a lot of folks who look at TCU and they understand psychologically what being a 12.5-point dog could mean. They look at history. We told you the next biggest underdog in a title game this millennium was Ohio State in 2002, and they won outright. So, yeah, there's precedent for it. Our model agrees, for the record, with Vegas. The Pate State model has Georgia minus 13. I looked at the intangibles there that I just listed. And, guys, if I could find enough of a convincing argument, if I could find a statistical profile in red zone that may be enough to flip this, if I thought that Quentin Johnson was going to be able to have enough disproportionate impact on this game to where it negates a lot of this stuff, like Jamison Williams did against Georgia 2 years ago, like Marvin Harrison was en route to doing, whatever. He was on his way to doing last week before he got knocked out, questionably, but got knocked out. I would let you know, I don't necessarily know that they'll be able to do that against Georgia. And for that reason, I think Georgia's going to win the game. I think Georgia's going to cover. And I'm not going to put a best bet sticker on this, but I do think that there is a bet that I'm going to individually place on this game. And right now the number's 36, and that would be the Georgia team total. I personally will be betting the over on the Georgia team total. Now the fun follow-up there is if TCU were to pull this off, how big of an upset is it? I would argue it's one of the very biggest upsets in the history of college football. An odds maker would look at you and say, well, that's dumb. We have bigger upsets than this every week in college football. In terms of point spread, you do. But if TCU wins the national championship game, they also won the national championship. And I have to account for the fact that that means games 1 through 12, making it through a conference title game, losing it and still making it into the playoff, winning a semifinal game, winning the title game as somewhere between a 200 and a 250 to 1 long shot preseason. Yeah, I'm going to call that one of the very biggest upsets in the history of college football. Now, I personally don't think it's what we're going to see, but we're going to make the trip to Los Angeles anyway, just in case. Hope to see you guys out there. Guys, thanks for watching Late Kick. Make sure to leave a comment. I love interacting with you. But most of all, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep all of this free.